again, welcome to SAFe and the Spotify model, making the most of both. And Crisp, who is hosting this event, we are a small boutique consultancy, as I like to call it, in Stockholm, based mostly in Stockholm, in Sweden. And we have 25 consultants who are all have a lot of experience when it comes to Agile, Lean, everything from coaching to engineering, running training, transformations, helping out with that in the modern product development and collaboration methods. Pretty known in Sweden for our lots of training and bringing in people and stars and thought leaders for a decade or two to do training in Stockholm on location. And I am Joakim Sundén. That's how my name is actually pronounced. And I've been at Crisp since 2017. Before that, I spent 6.5 years at Spotify from 2011, or from 8 teams, as I like to say, until 2017, or 200 teams, more than 200 teams. So quite a growth journey. And I was part of the group who actually co-developed and introduced this concept of tribes and squads and chapters and guilds, and that hence has become known as the Spotify model. And besides being part of that and working with that model or approach actively for many years and in many different tribes, leadership teams, squads at Spotify, when I left Spotify, moved back from the US, where I stayed also for a couple of years. You can see my Boston t-shirt here, the Boston office, where I worked. When I came back to Sweden and joined Crisp, I actually took a SAFe training just to get a hang on what is this. And my friend Yuval Yeret, that I knew already from the Kanban community, he was invited to Stockholm and Crisp, mutual friends there, to do this training. So I more saw it as, a great opportunity to get to know a little bit about SAFe and get to hang with Yuval for a few days. But then I realized after those 4 days, I'm now apparently a SAFe program consultant and can now teach and help organizations with SAFe. So I more stumbled onto this accidentally, you could say, just trying to branch out and learn more. And I've since worked with a couple of clients in bigger transformations involving dozens of teams or even more, where we've sometimes mixed Spotify model, but the client was already using a Spotify model approach. I didn't champion it. Same with SAFe, I should say. I entered when they were already doing SAFe, but I've also helped introduce SAFe, run a lot of SAFe trainings and seen a lot of SAFe implementations. And so has my colleagues, and we've discussed that a lot. You can see some of the clients I work with there. I'm also happen to be the co-author of a book, Kanban in Action, available in Japanese, Chinese, simplified Chinese, and so on. And you can see my contact email. If there's any question that you feel that I couldn't reply to, or you want to dig deeper into, feel free to connect with me, and we can set up a chat, or maybe I can point you in the right direction where you can find the answers online, depending on your question. So let's get into it and start with the really basic, what is SAFe? So SAFe for Lean Enterprises is a knowledge base of proven integrated principles, practices, and competences for achieving business agility using Lean, Agile, and DevOps. And it's freely available online. There's a lot of resources on scaledageileframework.com. And it's also supported by the SAFe community platform, the customer success team, an extensive network of 400 plus scaled agile partners, providing platform, training, consulting, implementation services in almost every region of the world. And I guess many of you are familiar with this picture, the big picture of SAFe that's available on the website, and where you can click on each of these icons and names and texts and drill down and deepen your understanding of the SAFe framework. Okay, so that's fairly easy and fairly well known. Then, what is the Spotify model? I find that to be a little bit more of a trickier question, actually. Even for someone who worked with Spotify for a long time, I was part of developing it, because it's constantly moving and it depends on who you ask. But the common knowledge is that But most people think of when they think about the Spotify model is squads and chapters and tribes, tribe leads, maybe chapter leads, agile coaches, and guilds maybe. And there's a white paper that was published many moons ago, and a couple of engineering culture videos, and that's basically the canon of the Spotify model literature. And this is what comes to mind when people are trying to understand what the Spotify model is. But then I've pooled resources. I developed a training around Spotify Agile at Scale, inspired by Spotify, with another CRISP colleague who was a consultant at several CRISP consultants were at Spotify. I was employed and later joined CRISP, if that wasn't clear. So we've developed a training and tried to capture some of the things that are not included in the white paper and happened after that, and was, to me, core part of the Spotify model that's kind of missed or glossed over in the white paper. And it's hinted at, or you can discover it through the engineering culture video, but it's pretty scarce. It's not a lot of specifics. So I pulled resources with Ivar Jakobsson, who has this essence. The idea to break free of the method presence and find a way of describing processes and practices and methods in its parts through an open standard that's called Essence. So that's actually now a hopefully growing source of definition of what does the Spotify model means. Spotify model essentials, along with some core beliefs that has not been really well documented. But there's also actually a book written by my colleague Jonathan, or former colleague Jonathan Rasmussen, who is now at Apple, actually, in California, who moved to Stockholm from Canada, author of Agile Samurai. He's written a lot about how Spotify works in the book with the title Competing with Unicorns. And I know many people have missed that, but that's also a good source of what actually the Spotify model is about. And this is maybe one overlooked part, that Spotify was very heavily influenced by big tech back in the day. We had people from Google, influential people from Netflix, Rochelle King, the director of design. Daniel, the founder, was friends with Mark Zuckerberg from an early stage. We had a lot of exchange with Facebook and Netflix, Google, Twitter even, and so on. So a lot of the core of how Spotify actually worked, and that's not come clear enough through descriptions of the Spotify model, is captured in books like Empowered by Marty Kagan, How Google Works, and Netflix Rules. The core principles of it, which I would say they're kind of hidden here, but developing people, autonomy, empower and trust your people, and so on. So, but for now, we can work with this. I kind of like this definition from Atlassian, who makes Jira. A people-driven autonomous approach for scaling Agile that emphasizes the importance of culture and network. And you can read more about their definition over there at Atlassian. There's lots of material available online, as I hinted at, but also blog posts, videos, and so on. But you kind of have to do the curation yourself. And there's, to my knowledge, only one Spotify model course, so that's very different from the industry that is SAFe, and that's of course my Spotify model course. And even that one is very much you have to think for yourself, and this is what we tried, and this is how it worked, and so on. So it's not that clear. But there are things that are pretty clear, and I think is an integral part. If you want to say in a meaningful way that we're using the Spotify model, or we're letting the Spotify model guide our attempts at scale, there are some things that I think you should be doing most of for it to be even meaningful to talk about following a model or framework. More on that, of course, as we go. So let's start with some, and I'm going to do Q&A at the end, as I stated in the email. If you have a question for understanding, or wait a minute, can you please explain that? Feel free to put it in the chat, and I'll try to monitor it as we go. Or if it's something you really want to get off your chest, you can request to unmute, or actually maybe unmute yourself. I heard some noise earlier. So anyway, what are the similarities on a high level? Well, they are both obviously approaches to achieve business agility at scale. But I think it's just at scale, and that might be what differentiates it from example. If you look at what Marty Kagan writes about in Inspired or Empowered or Lean Startup Way of Working and so on, it doesn't say much about how can we succeed in this with this at scale, basically. A collection of patterns, principles, practices, many of which are based on Lean, Agile, and DevOps. That's literally what SAFe said it is, a knowledge base. And that's pretty much what we did at Spotify. We found things, we copied it, we tried, we experimented, we tweaked it, we named it in our own way. But very little of what Spotify came up with, or that's part of the Spotify model, is a new innovation, if anything. It's more, naming it a little bit differently and tweaking it and saying, this is what we mean with it. So some high-level differences, I believe, is that they're of different origin. And I actually think this helps to understand how they are different and maybe when to choose to be more guided by one over another. And I should also have added this disclaimer, but I can do it now. This is, of course, my highly subjective personal opinions and based on experience and as I said, a lot of experience with Spotify model, of course, but also having taught many courses in SAFe and been part of several SAFe guided agile transformations. So SAFe, in my view, evolved to help develop agile requirements for enterprises with complex systems that require the cooperation of multiple teams and managing dependencies between them. And it was already Dean Leffingwell, the founder or creator of Scale Agile Framework, had his book Agile Software Requirements, where he first launched the ideas of product manager, product owner relationship, and agile release trains and PA plannings and so on. So it was a lot on how can we help these big companies work in a more agile, less waterfall, less bureaucratic way. While Spotify's approach evolved to keep these autonomous squads, these empowered teams, aligned during fast growth and scale up. So how can we make sure that we can move towards the same vision and enable collaboration through alignment while avoiding dependencies, so that we still can be autonomous and empowered and move really fast and learn and experiment fast. So it's really staying agile when growing and avoiding adding unnecessary bureaucracy. And bureaucracy isn't necessarily bad. It's actually helpful and can help overcome a lot of subjective disputes and so on, and leads to efficiencies of scale and so on. So I'm not using it in a necessarily bad way, but too much bureaucracy, of course, bad, but how much is too much? So another way of viewing it is this, that's probably familiar for many of you. So it's according to Stephen Bungay, who's actually teaching his strategy course remotely via CRISP in December. You can view our course page if you want to. It says that the more alignment you create, the more you can actually enable autonomy. So it's not either or, but it's actually through alignment you enable autonomy. So if you have low autonomy and alignment, people don't know what the direction is, and they don't have any freedom or empowerment to do anything. So they basically have to be micromanaged for anything to happen. And you get a pretty indifferent culture. Who cares about anything, right? And high alignment, okay, you have an authoritative organization, a conformist culture. It's very clear. We have plans and specifications, and this is where we need to be going. And we can coordinate all our efforts to reach our shared goal, symbolized by this build a bridge, pointy-haired boss. And then, of course, and you always want to be in this top corner, in these four fielders, innovative organization with a collaborative culture. So because we're clear on where we need to go, we need to cross the river. you can figure out how, and we set up different practices and mechanisms for you in order to be able to collaborate while innovating, experimenting, and figuring it out, you who are closest to the problem, so to speak. And this, I see, is how SAFe was SAFe's origin, then, going from maybe even from low alignment with micromanaging waterfall organization to be more, okay, let's how can we coordinate and align ourselves and go more into this innovative organization with a collaborative culture. While Spotify came out of entrepreneurial organization, chaotic culture, and tried to really get more collaboration and avoiding this, hope someone is working on the river problem, but I don't know. There's a lot of entrepreneurial ideas, but very chaotic. So that's another way of doing it. All right, so let's go to the similarities then on a lower level. So on the left, you have the picture, very simple picture of the Spotify model. On the right, the scaled agile framework. So if we look at the actual similarities when it comes to core beliefs, so Spotify is based, as I mentioned, in agile values and principles. We had agile coaches running around from an early stage, the CTO who was really a strong advocate of this model, and the one who introduced the terminology on autonomous squads and so on. He called himself the first agile coach at Spotify, and he was the one who set all these things up. And he was hired basically because he had successfully taken a scale-up organization to success by using Lean-Agile methods and principles. And so they are pretty much the same, I would say, in SAFe and the Spotify model. Although there are different points that are more emphasized. The empower and trust is strongly emphasized and at the core. And these 5 core beliefs, you can look at them in detail later, is my attempt to really capture what stands out and is truly different. And you can probably find each of them in SAFe, which is both a blessing and a curse with SAFe, because you have the 4 core values. You have the lean house with 4 pillars, a roof and a floor, and each of these pillars have 7 or 10 principles in themselves. You have the Agile Manifesto with the 4 values, the 12 principles. You have the 10 SAFe principles, and so you can pretty much find a principle for, the Groucho Marx quote comes to mind. If you don't like my principles, I have others. So that also means that it's hard to find guidance. What's truly important is decentralizing control, which is similar to empower and trust. Is that truly important, and how does it relate to the others? But in theory, most of them are the same. Very similar, at least. All right, so and the squad maps directly, I would say, to the agile team of SAFe, but that's kind of a no-brainer. I mean, what organization today is not using or trying at least to use a small agile team? So of course there are bound to be similarities. Even if you look at any scale framework or agile framework, it's focused around the agile team. 5 to 7 to 10 people. The numbers might vary. Scrum at scale says 5 plus minus 2. Spotify would say 7 plus minus 2. SAFe that a little bit bigger is okay because they don't count the Scrum Master and Product Owner. But on an appearance level, structural level, it's pretty much the same. Product Owner, yeah, both models have a Product Owner role, who seems to be someone who is guiding the team on what should they be doing in some sense. And then a tribe is kind of similar to an Agile Release Train. An Agile Release Train is supposed to have 50 to 125 members organized around value, being able to deliver value together. Same at Spotify, we said 40 to 100, but in practice it varied by 40 was probably the bottom, but it could be bigger than that from time to time. I think less large scale Scrum is a little bit smaller. It's something around 4 to 8 teams, which kind of makes sense from a Spotify experience as well, because the bigger tribes we often found divided themselves into product areas within the tribe. And it all comes back to the Dunbar number, you know. If you don't know it, you should look it up, because that's where we got a lot of inspiration for why we call it tribe. There's a limit to how many meaningful social relationships can you have in a context. And tribes also organized around mission or value, customer focus. So Agile Coach, well, you could say it's kind of similar to Scrum Master in the team, but also the Chief Scrum Master, it's sometimes called the RTE. So it's well, similar, if not the same, on a surface level. Tribe leads, well, we have a trio that are responsible for the tribe, and you have some kind of trio. M. Campbell Pretty called it trifecta. It doesn't actually have a name in SAFe now, does it? This trio of functions, actually, so it could be more people or less. So this seems a bit similar, that you have a trio, some at the head of the tribe or Agile Release Train, the team of teams. And then you have communities of practice in SAFe, and you have guilds in Spotify model, very similar thinking. You have communities in large-scale Scrum, for that matter. And then portfolio model and Lean-Agile budgeting. We didn't call it that at Spotify, but that's basically what we did, which means that the portfolio was not of projects, but a portfolio of tribes. So how much do we want to spend? We were mainly talking about headcount, you know, increasing or decreasing budgeting, how much you were willing to invest in an area or not. And that's what we were tracking, not project costs or portfolios of projects or programs, which we actually didn't have. And instead of strategic themes, Spotify had company bets and company beliefs and 2 North Star and 2-year goals. So it's similar. Similar to lean portfolio management done in a good way, I should say. I unfortunately don't have time to go into the intricacies of bad or good lean portfolio management, but ping me for that later. So yeah, a lot of similarities, at least on a surface level. But as soon as you start scratching the surface, the differences actually come through. So let's focus on them for a bit. Oops, sorry. Oops. So the main difference, I would say, is actually between what's common for all scale frameworks and more or less all companies these days. It's between the Agile team and the autonomous squad. So in the name of the guy who was the CTO during my time at Spotify and who was the driver behind this model, actually, the most important feature of the organization is the autonomous squad. All other features are designed to support that mini startup-like squad. And this is something that we wrote about and we talked about, and autonomous squads and so on. But the rest of the world outside of Spotify seem to have a slightly different definition of autonomous, meaning being able to release independently. But we meant, no, they should be actually like a mini startup. They should autonomously be able to come up with what should they be doing. Not completely autonomously, but guided, as you can see in this some call it the sperm picture, by the product squad strategy and the squad mission, the reason why it was created, and the objectives and the North Star goals of the company, of course. But given objectives, they should be able to figure it out, basically. And this is a topic that this guy has written a lot about. It's Marty Kagan. So it's no secret how great product companies work. That's what he's saying. Amazon, Google, Netflix, Spotify, Stripe, and so on. In most companies, technology teams exist to serve the business. It's a cost of doing the real business. But in strong product companies, the purpose of the product team is to serve customers by creating products customers love, yet work for the business. So it's a very different perspective, actually. And I would claim, I claim that SAFe is very much still driven out of the first perspective, that the technology teams are here to exist, that they exist to serve the business. And we get this a little bit of the customer vendor anti-pattern. Doesn't necessarily have to be that way, but it seems that that's often what happens. So we have the business who are the order givers and dream up the things that we're going to do, and maybe even specify or make the requirements. And then we have IT or tech who are supposed to just deliver, more or less, maybe a slight exaggeration. And I'm going to come back to Marty Kagan and Empower, because he describes very much in his book exactly the way things worked at Spotify. So that's a good handbook, I would say, to understand the Spotify model. And this is actually how he puts the difference. There's delivery teams, not cross-functional, basically just developers plus a backlog administrator, product owner, who just prioritizes a list of things that are already given or specified. It's all about output. Are we delivering the feature? Are we following the specification? Are we fulfilling the requirements? They're not empowered, they're just there to code and ship. And then you could have feature teams, usually cross-functional, at least some form of designer and some form of product manager, but still very much focused on output. Are we delivering the features, the enhancements, the things, and not really empowered? The backlog in general is often decided by stakeholders, by a project or by a sales-driven process, and maybe you can influence the specifics and how it should be solved, but decisions are often made somewhere else, and you're not responsible for if it actually succeeds. And then you have empowered product teams, cross-functional, focused on and measured by outcome, and empowered to come up with solutions that work. So we have a goal, we have an objective, but we're not done until we've actually, we have to figure out how to solve it. We have to understand and talk to the customer, interact with them, and run experiments and do A/B tests and so on. And maybe some of you are familiar with Kagan, and like many others, he's not a big friend of SAFe. And he's actually said that in his book, Empowered, if you're running a process like SAFe, and this is unfortunately you, the delivery team. And truthfully, I have no idea why you would want to read this book, since what I describe here is the polar opposite, both philosophically and practically. And well, I think that might be a slight exaggeration, but I can understand where it's coming from. I mean, SAFe is big. It's all over the world. There are bound to be a lot of bad implementations, and it's doing a very tricky job, taking on a very difficult challenge of actually transforming big companies and shifting their mindset and way of working. And that is a hard problem. So we shouldn't be surprised that it's often failing. So just to drive the point home, we would say in an autonomous squad, this idea that we're working on X because Sam, the stakeholder, said it's important, and we're done when Sam is okay with it, or when the specification is fulfilled. No, we're working on X because we think it's going to give impact Y, which matters to Spotify because of Z. We're done when the metrics have moved, when we see actual changes in the world, changes in how users behave. Are they subscribing more? Are they tweeting more? And so on. And this is just to show how Google works in a very similar way, and it's nothing that we came up with. Let the data drive decisions, not the highest paid person's opinion, the so-called HIPPO prioritization. But if you don't have the means, if you don't have the tools, you don't have the way of working, of actually figuring out, are we actually driving the results? Then who's going to call the shots? Who's going to decide what to do? Who's going to prioritize? Well, we have to pass it to the HIPPO because there's no way of knowing. And we don't want to take responsibility if something's wrong. So this means that there's a big difference also in the SAFe product owner role and the Spotify product manager. And we've called it product owner during all my years at Spotify, but just when I left, we changed it to product manager. So I'm using that here to highlight the difference, because one reason why we changed it was that SAFe, not just SAFe, but many organizations had messed up the definition of product owner where it had come to mean something that, you know, tactically inwards facing, backlog owner, working with the tech team, not the person being out there, you know, understanding users and dreaming up ideas and so on. So when we advertised for product owners, we couldn't even get the right people to look at the ads. So we had to change it to product manager. But also a lot around product management that has happened in the product management world also to make this distinction more clear. So the way that my colleague Jason Jipp at Spotify, and he's still there, writes a lot of good stuff about Spotify model and modern product development on medium.com. He introduced this concept of you know, gatekeeping context, which is, well, textbook Scrum, I would say, and how you do it most of the time with SAFe. So you have all this product context and understanding about what we should be building and what the customer needs and so on. But that's more for the product owner and designer, or maybe the product manager or the business owners or some stakeholders, and they are the ones who get in touch with this. And then they translate it into work. One client I worked with actually called it the sausage factory. We put it into the sausage factory and we have no idea what's coming out, without even joking, right? So this gives low empathy, of course, and low engagement if you're not connected to the purpose and how things are actually changing people's lives and improving things. What we instead wanted to do at Spotify was to have the product owner, product manager, designer be facilitating context. So how can we make this product context, the customer context, everything we learn and know and understand, how can we make it accessible to the team? How can we frame it in the right way, make it more easily digestible? How can we put it in a way and maybe cherry pick some of the most important things so they don't have to be bothered with everything, so they can be part of making the decisions on what we should be doing, because they are the ones that are working with the enabling technology all the days. So they often know how to best solve different problems or what experiments to run. And I claim that SAFe is still very much in the gatekeeping product owner world. This is the picture that is still used for Scaled Agile Framework, both training and on the website. So it says product owners are solution, technology, and team focused. The Agile teams are delivery focused. And then the product manager, well, they can be more market and customer focused and talk to the customers and so on. And then they are a proxy for the product owners or a proxy for the teams and so on. So we get a lot of handoffs and gatekeeping, translating the context into work orders, basically. And just to give you an idea on what it means to be, because I know some people struggle with understanding what does it mean even facilitating product owner, product manager. Well, this is one example from Spotify where, you know, all devs, all the engineers, they would have access to metrics and dashboards and so on. But the product manager would have more time, better competence, more focus on collaborating with product analysts and others, and to really figure out what's signal here and what's noise, what should we be focusing on, what interpreting the data, what does it mean, and presenting that in a nice way then to the team, because we couldn't expect everyone to have the same interest or the same time to actually do that, even if they theoretically could. And then translate that into, you can see it exactly here, but it's describing a problem, or to improve, we should optimize friction versus taste signals, get more people to play without hurting recommendations. So it's describing the context and giving the team a problem to solve, not saying, based on these metrics, we should do this. And also the same thing, they could probably be part of the user research interviews or watch them afterwards on video, but you could also work with the user researchers as a product manager. And you could make it more just, this is what stood out for us in the interviews. This is what people are saying, but it's not handing the teams solutions to implement. But actually now we can figure it out together. What do we need to do? What's the next experiment we should be running? What should we test next? So that's kind of the difference. And connected to this is also that SAFe still struggles a lot with a heavy requirement model that lends itself to keep a waterfallish approach. You know, every story is connected to a feature, connected to an epic or a capability, and you you can see it trickle down into individual tasks that then will bubble all the way back up. While at Spotify we focus much more on what's the strategic context here. What are some key insights that we've discovered in other teams or in product analytics and so on, and give that as input and signals back to the team. This is what we see. These are some insights around how people are using the product, and then give them objectives, goals to reach, problems to solve, and have them figure out the solutions themselves. And this might be one of the biggest differences then. So I've actually divided into several sub-bullets or sub-points here. But the fact that SAFe is actually advocating and boasting this idea that you don't have to make changes to the organization. You can actually, have a dual operating system. I feel that there's some violence done to Kotter's idea, but maybe I'm wrong. Of the dual operating system that he wrote about in Accelerate. And so the idea is that you don't have to change or challenge the existing hierarchy. You can just make a virtual organization out of the Agile Release Trains that's aligned with value streams. So people can still be reporting to different silo departments and bosses and so on, and you don't really change that. And I think this can be really good. In reality, we often don't get to choose how companies are going to transform. We can't just say you should definitely do this. Just do it. We have to come up with a solution that's accepted by the system, which is big and complex and connected. And this might be, enough of a change that we can get them to swallow. So it's offers a transformation path where they might otherwise have said, no, we can't make those big changes, and there's union involved and so on. So it could be easier, and you don't have to get maybe other parts like HR as involved and so on. But I argue that in the end, you're doing yourself a disfavor, because sooner or later you will have to deal with this, and you can't just sweep it under the rug. So one example is how SAFe focus a lot of their terminology and setup on the Agile Release Train. Just the name, an Agile Release Train, that incrementally develops, delivers, and where applicable, operates one or more solution. And so this is the picture they use for it. Why is, you can say, what does that mean? But the saying the picture says more than 1,000 words. And with the tribe, you have the people and the structures and so on. And the actual reason, the question we asked ourselves that the tribe was the answer to is, how do we get bigger and still feel small? But we drill down, what does that really mean? How do we increase our impact and still support people feeling like they have access, are part of establishing direction, are autonomous and trusted, and have a strong sense of relatedness? So it's really about building this sense of team in a team of teams and giving them a home where they know everyone, where they know who to go to for help, and keeping them as autonomous basically from the rest of the organization as possible, and give them a chance to build something, to create something together, and a shared identity through shared experiences and so on. You could say that it's a little bit, maybe it's exaggerated, release coordination versus tribal unity. So SAFe is more geared towards, you need to coordinate releases between many different teams. And Spotify, how can we build this relatedness and so people feel that they have access, so they feel empowerment and autonomy by, for example, shared identity, creating these logos and names and so on. And there's a load of things you can do. And N. Campbell-Pretty has actually written a great book about this tribal unity, a friend of mine, who also happens to be a SAFe fellow. And this book actually tells the tale on how she applied some of the Spotify model concepts, and actually also my book, Kanban in Action, that she mentioned several times, on SAFe Agile Release Trains in Australia many years ago. And she repeated that successfully, and she's also written another great book on SAFe, actually. So I encourage you to look into that. And I think that's a very much overlooked thing, just calling it a tribe and then organizing around value, but not seizing the opportunity to actually build this one team culture and sense of team in a team of teams is something that everyone should do. And the trifecta function, it doesn't even have a name for that trio of functions that are in some sense heading up the Agile Release Train. When I first took the course by Yuval, my friend, and he talked about the release train engineer and chief scrum masters, I envisioned, oh yeah, of course that's an experienced agile coach, and they're probably working really close together with the others to create a nice culture and an agile way of working in the Agile Release Train. Then when I came to SAFe implementations, I said, no, that's typically maybe a release coordinator or something that's have limited experience from working in an agile way, which is okay if you just help support that person's development and surround them with experienced agile coaches and others. But I also saw that the RTE would rarely be talking even to the product management or the system architects, very separate silos still. While the Spotify Tribe Lead Trio would be all about individual accountability. Sure, we have our different areas, but collective responsibility. We're dealing with things as a team and investing a lot in building a cohesive leadership team, alignment and owning this together, having a shared responsibility, building and nurturing and creating this great tribe together. And I feel that's one effect probably of having this being a virtual organization, where these people actually doesn't have anything to do with each other organizationally, and they don't have this shared responsibility in a sense for the tribe's success, but rather divided, specialized responsibilities. And also resource managers versus people developers, I call this. So there's a tendency that if you don't specifically reschool managers, I mean, this is a huge thing in all change management and agile change management for a very long time. This frozen middle management, and if you don't change middle management, and it's surprising to me that SAFe is so silent on that. Where are the managers in this? There's one course, leading SAFe, that's a lot of great principles and great stuff, but it says very little on how am I supposed to change in my day-to-day interactions with the team? How is my role different? And in many of these organizations, big bureaucratic ones, you're more of a resource manager, supplying different projects historically with people, and this is kind of still what you're doing. Maybe you have outsourced partners that you're also managing, and have too many people to, in any meaningful way, be actually acquiring and developing talent. And this really stands out when you look at Spotify, Netflix, Google, Amazon, how they're all about acquiring and developing talent. Hire the best you can and develop them to be even better. And if you look at Kagan, which resonates very much with my Spotify experience, he says that a product tribe lead, which is not at all what a product manager does, they spend 80% maybe of their time staffing and coaching, developing their people. And this is also, to me, a huge difference. So, I mean, where's the Agile Manager training even say? There's a training for everyone, Scrum Master, Advanced Scrum Master, Product Owner, DevOps, but nothing for the Agile Manager. Communities of practices are great. We call them guilds, as mentioned at Spotify. But what about chapters? We found that they were really great for building an engineering culture, and this helps other companies with transformations to really, we often want to rebuild engineering culture that we lost when we started outsourcing or treated IT as a cost center mainly. And now they are the stars. We need to get them back. We need to have empowered engineers who can help us innovate and stay ahead of the competition and so on. How do we get them? Well, chapters is a great way. That's a small group of 4 to 10 people in Spotify model terms who have the same competency, backend developers or Java developers even, or QA or and so on, who regularly meet to discuss how can we improve our craft, how can we make our engineering culture even better, what does great look like within our area of craftsmanship and so on. but that's kind of missing from SAFe. And then leaving the virtual versus actual organization, going to how do we actually often apply or implement or go on a transformation or journey towards becoming more, increasing our business agility. Well, SAFe has its implementation roadmap, and even though there are great stuff in it, it kind of lends itself a little bit too easily, for my taste, to a waterfall top-down project. Now we're going to have an inception phase. We train all the leaders, and then we're going to do the first tribe, and then we're going to do the next tribe. Or we have a pilot, but then it's just going to roll on, and you know, the people have to wait their turn because it's management that have decided which one should go first and which one should go later, and it's, you know, checking all these dots and all these steps, and then it kind of gives the impression, and that's at least what I've seen in practice, that then you're kind of done. You know, you made all these changes. Let's not, you know, upset the boat. Let's not move too much. While and it's implementing. While the Scaled Agile Framework website is a great knowledge base where you can pick and choose and find a lot of good stuff, according to me. The trainings that most people, that's what they see, what they learn. They're much more narrow and focused on this is how you should do it. Just do the mechanics, which might be exactly what you need as a beginner. But if it stops there and you don't evolve and don't experiment and try different things, I don't think you're setting yourself up for success. The Spotify's approach, and which I think is integral with the Spotify model then, is to experiment and try and have a continuous discovery, cross-pollinate, use bright spots in the organization, see what's working for others, how can I try that, how can I adapt that, have a really clear idea, what am I trying to achieve by bringing this practice in, or by relying heavily on this principle. What am I hoping to achieve? Am I achieving that? Following up and so on. When we introduced tribes, we said we want to minimize dependencies. And then we went around and actually mapped, are we doing that? Are we successfully doing that? And discovered lots of things in the process of doing that as well. And could make tweaks and changes based on what we discovered. So, okay, that's some of the similarities and some of the differences. So how can we make the most of both? How can we work together? Could we be Spotifying SAFe? Could we just apply more of the Spotify model on SAFe, or vice versa? I'm going to focus on Spotifying SAFe because if it's not clear through this, I mean, some people are going to say that I'm not fair in my representation of SAFe, and maybe comparing it more to Spotify than companies who have imitated or followed the Spotify model. But you know, others and more people are probably going to say that I'm too nice to SAFe. So you go. I can base it in another point of view than my own. I don't have any other. So the way I view it, SAFe it could be a good transformation path for a company that's not going to go, you know, full agile. We're not going to go empowered product teams. You know, it's engineers outsourced, it's too big, it's too slow, it's too difficult. Okay, great. SAFe might offer you a path forward. And I view then Spotify's model maybe as being more of an inspirational or aspirational, so that you don't get too stuck in just doing the SAFe basics and SAFe mechanics exactly as it was taught in training, but more starting to think about what are the best doing, how could we be even better. Maybe some of our teams and tribes should actually be moving in this direction. And actually, what's stopping you from Spotify and SAFe? If you go into, you know, a random article on Scaled Agile Framework, it's very hard to find something that you would disagree with. I challenge you. You know, if you believe in Agile and Lean principles, I challenge you to come up with except the one that I talked about, the product manager, but anything around Agile team or Agile release trains and so on, that this is a bad idea. I would never recommend anyone to do this. You could probably say that they emphasize this a little bit too more. I don't like the language. They emphasize this too little. They're actually not mentioning this at all. But it's hard to say that, no, this is a bad thing. But also, I mean, it's all about inspecting and adapting. Some trainers would have you say, and Dean Leffingwell would say, if you're not doing PI planning, you're not doing SAFe. Oh, so we can't drop PA planning. But who's forbidding you? If we're going to trust Scaled Agile themselves, it's a body of knowledge around these things with different patterns and practices. And that's a little bit the tricky situation with Scaled Agile framework.
Det var Adam, kan du ringa honom?
Oh, sorry, someone needs to unmute. The framework is great and it's free and a lot of good stuff available, but the training, the organization pushing it and so on, well, I'm not going to go into that now, but maybe later. So there's nothing really that sets in state that, oh, we can't have focus more on outcomes, we can't have OKRs, or we shouldn't invest in tribal unity. So there's no problem doing that. So I just want to mention before Q&A, sorry for running late, some of the things that I've seen work and that you could try is integrate business and IT through mission-based tribes, for instance. So maybe not go full-blown, let's change the actual organization, but if you can succeed in at least having a leadership team, a tribe lead trio, let's say, where the product manager, if you're using SAFe, is actually from the business side, if you're divided in business and IT. So they're not a proxy for the business. You actually put the people who are representing the business together with IT. You're going to get the propinquity effect, the person you see and meet with every day. You're going to get empathy with, and they're going to understand your problems and challenges much more, and start building this cohesive leadership team and get this shared understanding of what do we need to do. At the best, so used to say you have a hostage now in IT or tech, but joking aside, the goal is, and I've seen this happen, that they will now start saying, wow, we can actually change things every 2 weeks. So we can have a lot more input than I ever knew. We can see things happening. We can have these quarterly plannings, and why are we doing annual plans and driving these big projects? There's so much feedback and things going on, and they start driving change towards the business organization when they get their eyes open. And develop and sustain tribal unity. I mean, heck, the tribal unity book, as I said, she applied the Spotify model concepts and other things on Agile Release Trains, and have done so successfully multiple times. So there's nothing stopping you from building this sense of team in a team of teams, even if you just have an Agile Release Train. And empower your people. How can we focus more on outcomes? How can we ask ourselves, why are we doing this? And how do we know that we're achieving the results? Okay, if we don't know, how can we start figuring out if we are actually reaching the results? And once you start doing that, you're going to see that most of the things that we thought were achieving the results, they aren't. That's the truth of product development. And once that floodgate is open, you will start to take a bigger interest in empowered engineers and so on. But to do this, it helps if you can develop product owners, product managers to be more collaborative leaders, to present problems instead of solutions to the teams. So because successful products are created in the intersection of different competencies and perspectives. And then focus, of course, on outcomes instead of outputs. Are we actually changing behaviors? Are we achieving more subscriptions, more active engagement, more users, or just producing features and enhancement and products and hoping, keeping our fingers crossed? And then use OKRs for aligned autonomy, maybe introduce team objectives. That's basically saying that instead of assigning you features and epics for this quarter, we're going to try to give you an objective, a problem to solve, and that will be responsible for figuring out and following up the results. And that means prepare to insource. Because if you really want to develop your people, if you really want to have empowered engineers and you want them to be knowledgeable about these things and understand it, and you want long-term growth and development of talent, and you've outsourced most of your engineers, you need to rethink that. I'm sorry, but I don't see another option. And I think this is an important point. So I want to channel Kagan again. If you're just using your engineers to code, you're only getting about half their value. I have said many times that the best single source for innovation is your engineers, because they're working with the enabling technology every day. So they're in the best position to see what's just now possible. Hopefully, this is obvious, but a strong tech-powered product company would no sooner outsource their engineers than they would outsource their CEO. Developing an engineering culture, I already touched on that. When you if you have already outsourced, or if IT and tech has been a cost center and you have had a hard time attract talent, well, really fostering an engineering culture, more developer centric, maybe using chapters as mentioned, but also developing servant leaders. Have your leaders be people developers who actually solve problems in a way that increases the capability and commitment, engagement from the individual contributor, rather than solving problems for them and becoming a bottleneck. I'm going to skip this one. I actually didn't talk about potlucks. And finally, SAFe, Spotify model, etc. They're just toolboxes. It's not a method or a framework that you need to implement to its point. Less large-scale Scrum, you have the Nexus in there, I think, Lean Enterprise, which is a good source of doing enterprise agile. I just humble of the Accelerate book and DevOps community, if you know. So again, my colleague Jason Yip, follow me on Medium. Principles are probably generalizable, and there's similar in SAFe and Spotify model, but you need to experiment with the specific mechanics. I really love his saying here that models are for the obedience of fools and the guidance of the wise. A fool reads a case study and watches a video, maybe two, and thinks, this must be a utopia. If I just copy this, then my workplace will also be a utopia. And if it's wrong, then the model is to blame. And if I go to work to the company and it's not like I imagined, then the model must not be working. A wise person reads the same and does the same thing and thinks, what problem are they solving? What forces are they considering? These patterns seem similar to others I'm aware of or have applied myself. These are different, maybe interesting to experiment with, but I need to adapt them to my own context. But unfortunately, the line to simplistic solutions is always going to be longer than to the one on how to think for yourself. But you should also think for yourself. It's not really about SAFe or the Spotify model. The principles of both can probably be applied to your context. There are many useful patterns and practices in both to experiment with. And if you experiment, make sure you understand the principles behind them and modify specifics for your context. Follow up. Am I getting there? Are we doing better? Is this actually working? If not, tweak it, change it, throw it out, try something else. Exactly what an empowered team would do with product development. Are we reaching our goals? Are we getting the outcomes? If not, we need to try something different. And if nothing works, here's my email. You might contact me. I don't know if I'll be able to help, but I'm happy to be your sounding board or even help with training or workshops or consulting if I can find the time and we click. So lastly, I just want to say Chris offers courses. I have two on Spotify model or Agile Scale inspired by Spotify, one in Stockholm in December and one remote in January. And I offer 20% discount to everyone who is still around and who actually had the stomach to listen to all of this. So thank you. And sorry, but we have time for some questions at least. All right. I'm going to have a look in the chat. So, Ian Velosa, did you have a question? My understanding of Three Amigos. Do you want to ask that question or you want me to read it? Okay, I'll read. My understanding of Three Amigos is different to the SAFe Release Train trio. Three Amigos is just about getting a business person, a dev, and tester together to understand a story. The people playing these roles can change, whereas the three guys in SAFe are constant. Yeah, I'm not familiar with the Three Amigos concept. I see Håkan is linking to it there, but it has nothing to do with the Spotify model. That's my understanding. So I don't see a lot of questions. What do you recommend to read to learn more about managers in a SAFe context? That's a good question. So I really like, and we actually started reading his book, David Marquette, Turn Your Ship Around, that intent-based leadership. But it had a hard way of actually turning it into practice. So I think leadership is language, and some of the things that he has has written and also published videos on is great, because he really views it as he calls it control, to give control, which is empowerment or autonomy to me. It rests on two pillars: clarity and competence. It's similar also to what Stephen Bungay say. Clarity, the more alignment you have, the more control you can give. The more clear we are in the organization, the more we increase clarity, the more we can give control and empower. But if we're saying, oh, they're making the wrong decisions, maybe it's because we're not giving them clarity. We're not giving them those circumstances. And the other pillar, competence. It's all about developing people. Oh, they're not competent enough to make these decisions. But why did you hire them in the first place? And if you did, why are you not developing them and training them to be more empowered? And he has this ladder of leadership where he shows different steps. So you can't immediately go from, tell me what to do, or a manager is used to tell people what to do immediately, straight away to, just they want to do whatever they want, but have you go through different steps. So that's the model I really like. Let's see. I want to make sure I don't miss anything. I just wonder what your thoughts are on how to avoid the belief that a framework model solves an organization's problems. So I think, and it's if you have people in the organization who believes that, I think you're going to have a hard time convincing them differently. Probably if there's someone in upper management or leadership above you. So what I often lean towards is one simple way of starting introducing different ideas is if you can try to get them in the same room or in the same conference or with someone who they potentially could look up to. So I wouldn't say that I offered it as a service, but I did host visits when I was at Spotify and connected people with managers at Spotify. I have a harder time doing that now. We even had one company who were going to do this hot desking and what's it called? Where you go to work every morning and you have a new desk, and they thought it was a great idea, and then came to the Spotify office and then saw for themselves. They did never be like, I changed my mind like this, but then when they saw firsthand and it became their idea and their impression, that's when it can start to change. So put them with someone they trust and who actually are a proponent of these things. It's one easy answer, but probably not enough. But great images, quotes. I will share all the slides, and then I will also share links to training and to the books and so on that I mentioned. I recorded it, and I will try to, if not my technical incompetence that stops me. I mean, I used to be a developer for more than a decade, so I should be able to put up a video. So it should come out. Can you give sources where I can find the steps for making this happen in my organization? Any book or website? Oh, wow, no, that's a big question. What I could say is this model I really like. It's from the book Switch, How to Change Things When Change is Hard by the Heath brothers. I have this, I had to strike it out but I like this metaphor because it's not just about directing the rider, giving instructions on what you need to do and training and so on, but you need to motivate the elephant or it won't move. You need to paint a picture of a future and a vision and so on. But then also this shape the path. And my idea with this picture was to show that I think sometimes, SAFe might have the right direction to the rider and maybe able to motivate the elephant, I don't know. But they're kind of shaping the path in a way that doesn't lead you to the most agile or empowered way of doing things. So even if it's not, if some practices and descriptions and so on in SAFe is not at odds with empowerment or the Spotify model and so on, it can easily be interpreted that way, and it's easy to not go all the way. So I would recommend, I guess is what I'm trying to say, books about change in general, rather than any book on methods. But there is, I have it in my bookshelf, not accessible from here, but M. Campbell Prittis' other book, The Art of Avoiding a Train Wreck, or something like that. It's full of train metaphors. I think it's a pretty good handbook, not just for implementing, especially for SAFe, but it has good advice on any large scale agile transformation. Lean Change by Jason Little is another one. Do you recommend to go for SAFe or Spotify when it comes to a big organization like a bank? Well, I mean, I don't think there's any organization basically that wouldn't benefit from more empowerment and more empowered engineers and co-workers and really leveraging their knowledge and know-how and you know, being on the factory floor, facing the problems and combining that with better understanding of the business and how can I contribute and innovate. But then you have to look at what's realistic, what's the cost, what can we be doing. So I would probably, you know, try to find where are some spaces where we could have success with this way of working, the Spotify model, and try to, you know, generate bright spots, as the Heath brothers would call it, for others to follow if it's successful. But yeah, it's a deeper question in the sense that I touched on earlier, because it might be, you know, SAFe is all you got. SAFe is the card you're being dealt. You know, that's what management. It goes back to the, you know, no one was ever fired for buying IBM. That's kind of the SAFe argument, right? Because you know, it's proven. Many others are doing it. You have it scripted out. You can basically calculate the investment. It's this amount of training, and we're bringing these consultants for this year, and we just go through the motions. And so I would rather, you know, using the Spotifying the SAFe implementation tricks maybe. But I would, any day of the week, I would argue for Spotify's approach of actually understand what are we trying to achieve, what are we trying to do, what principles do we need, and what practices do we want to start experimenting with, and then figure out, are these actually helping us? Are they working for us? Are they giving us the effects? Not just saying, oh, we're going to do tribes or agile release trains because someone said so, or because that's how others are doing it, and we're not going to even evaluate if it's giving us the advantages that we're hoping for. Spotify is still using tribes and squads. Yes, they've hence added a lot of things, and they started experimenting or actually shifting pretty much away from chapter leads, for instance, because the pendulum swung very, very far in that sense. So they're all, you know, dedicated people developers. We have a rule of thumb at Spotify that no manager anywhere should have more than 10 direct reports to be able to really focus on their development and help them grow. I think Keegan is saying something around 6 to 9, maybe a fewer even if it's more junior people. But now they started to shift more to engineering managers that can be more of mentors rather than having chapters. But yeah, there's things like alliances and missions and business units, but at the core, it's still empowered product teams, squads, and tribes and chapters. Or maybe not chapters in all instances. Current PMs are great with customers, but are getting further from teams. Yeah, when the role was changed from POs to PMs. That's sad if that's the case. I'm not sure if that's a question though. How did you work with onboarding people to Spotify to the model as you were growing so fast? But it helped that people like me and others were out there talking about it. We were writing white papers and so on. So many of them knew about it even before starting at Spotify. And then we had it in, we talk a fair amount about onboarding actually in the Spotify course, but we had it, you know, mandatory reading material when coming to interviews. We did introduction days on a running schedule. We had boot camps for 2 weeks with a senior experienced agile coach who would work with. We would put all the newcomers together in a boot camp squad for 2 weeks, where they teach them the ropes and this is how we do things, and invest pretty much in training and so on. Traditional manufacturing company to be agile with empowered teams. Whoa, I'm gonna avoid that question. Sorry, Stig. Not sure about that one. Hoteling, I don't know what that means. Tribe is an actual structure, not virtual. Does that mean the line resource managers in the tribe? Yes. All the individual contributors or everyone in a chapter is reporting to a chapter lead. That chapter lead is reporting to the technology tribe lead. All the product owners or product managers are reporting to the product tribe lead. All the designers and UX people are reporting to the design tribe lead. And since Spotify has actually added in many tribes and insights tribe lead these days, but I don't know much about that. Agile coaches would typically report to tech tribe leads or an agile coach chapter lead if there were many agile coaches. What's the hardest thing about getting the traditional controlling managers to adapt to a servant leadership? I think it's in part is giving them it's back to this one, and motivate the elephant. What's in it for them? Why is this a good change for them? And then directing the rider, give them training and instructions. What's actually expected of you? What should you be doing differently? And then shaping the path. And I skipped that slide, but at Spotify we had potlucks. The product owner, tribe lead, team lead, as we called it initially, chapter lead, and agile coach would be working together. And we use that in other transformations afterwards that we call the squad trio. So it's basically setting up a forum where the scrum master, the manager, and the product owner, product manager for the team, they meet regularly. So just setting up that structure and saying you have a shared responsibility from different perspectives for this squad and its success. You need to collaborate and take shared responsibility, individual accountability, but collective responsibility, and have them start talking. And that was key in one transformation to actually managers starting to, I didn't want to step on the toes of the product owner and the scrum master, and I learned that I should be hands off, but now I realize there's a place for me how I can help them, help the team, and I actually have experience and a different perspective, and I know a lot of other things in the organization. We've also given them improvement kata with Toyota Kata training and have them run more of those things. So helping the teams, challenging them to make improvements rather than telling them what to do or making improvements or removing obstacles for them. Any other tribe leads on product tech and design? Yeah, insights these days. There's a little bit different in different tribes. Okay, I think I answered most of the ones I saw at least. So thank you for sticking with me so long, those of you who did, and thanks for the others who were with me, but maybe you'll see this thank you in the recording at least. As I said, please feel free to shoot me an email and I'll send out the slides as soon as possible and some links to training and the books and so on. Thank you for watching and listening, and have a great evening.